Your Honor, my daddy didn't kidnap me, I kidnapped myself. And in one shocking moment, a little girl's wild confession flipped a courtroom upside down, exposing a secret no one was ready to hear. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Daniel Carter's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his threadbare tie, the fabric worn thin from years of use. The tie had seen him through tough times before, job interviews, veterans meetings, and now this moment that could change everything. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations, their words stinging like paper cuts. "That's the one with PTSD," someone muttered. "Can barely keep a job," another voice added. Daniel kept his eyes forward, his military training helping him maintain his composure despite the gossip that floated around him like poison. His lawyer, a court-appointed defender who looked barely out of law school, shuffled papers nervously beside him. The young man hadn't made eye contact with Daniel all morning, as if uncertainty about his client's innocence made him uncomfortable. When the bailiff called everyone to rise, Daniel stood straight and tall, his military bearing automatic even in his ill-fitting suit. Judge Hamilton entered, his face stern and unreadable as he took his seat behind the bench. "Please be seated," the judge announced, his voice filling the small courthouse. Daniel's heart clenched as Marissa entered with Ellie. His daughter wore her favorite blue dress, the one with tiny white flowers that he'd bought her last Christmas. Her small hand was clasped tightly in her mother's grip, almost too tight. Daniel could see Ellie's fingers turning white. Marissa's face was set in stone, her jaw clenched as she guided Ellie to their seats. She wore an expensive-looking blazer and pencil skirt, a stark contrast to Daniel's shabby attire. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, filled with such hatred that Daniel had to look away. "We're here today regarding the alleged kidnapping of Eleanor Green, Carter," Judge Hamilton began, his voice steady and measured. "The prosecution claims that Mr. Daniel Carter violated custody agreements by failing to return his daughter after an authorized weekend visit." Daniel wanted to speak up, to explain, but his lawyer had warned him to stay quiet. He watched as Marissa leaned forward, whispering something in their daughter's ear. Ellie's small shoulders tensed. "Your Honor." Marissa's lawyer stood, a tall woman in an expensive suit. "My client has documentation showing that Mr. Carter was to return Eleanor by 6 p.m. on Sunday. He kept the child until Monday afternoon, causing severe emotional distress to both mother and daughter." The judge nodded, reviewing the papers before him. "And the defendant's explanation?" Daniel's young lawyer stood, his voice slightly shaky. "Your Honor, my client maintains that his daughter expressed fear about returning home and—" "Objection," Marissa's lawyer cut in. "The defendant is attempting to manipulate the situation by claiming—" "I'm not manipulating anything," Daniel burst out, unable to contain himself any longer. His lawyer grabbed his arm, trying to quiet him, but the words spilled out. "I would never hurt Ellie. She's my whole world." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel. "Order! Mr. Carter, please control yourself or you'll be held in contempt." Daniel slumped back in his chair, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. He could see Marissa's satisfied smirk. His outburst had played right into her hands. "Your Honor," Marissa's lawyer continued smoothly, "Mr. Carter's emotional instability is well documented. His service record shows incidents of PTSD, and his employment history since returning from deployment has been spotty at best. We have serious concerns about his fitness as a parent." The whispers grew louder. Daniel felt each word like a physical blow. Yes, he struggled with PTSD. Yes, holding down a steady job had been difficult. But he'd never, ever hurt Ellie. Judge Hamilton raised his hand for silence. "Let's hear from Mrs. Green. Please approach the stand." Marissa rose gracefully, squeezing Ellie's shoulder before walking to the witness stand. She was sworn in, her voice clear and confident as she took the oath. "Mrs. Green, please describe the events of last Sunday evening," her lawyer prompted. "I was worried sick," Marissa began, her voice trembling perfectly. When 6 p.m. came and went with no sign of Ellie, I called Daniel repeatedly. No answer. I called his apartment manager, his neighbors. No one had seen them. I was terrified he'd taken her somewhere, done something. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Daniel gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He wanted to shout that she was lying, that Ellie had been begging to stay, that he'd tried calling but Marissa had blocked his number months ago. And your concerns about Mr. Carter's stability? He's not stable, Marissa stated firmly. He can't keep a job. He lives in a tiny apartment in a bad neighborhood. Sometimes he zones out completely. PTSD episodes, he calls them. How can I trust my daughter with someone like that? The courtroom was silent now, hanging on every word. Daniel felt himself shrinking under the weight of judgment. Years of struggling to prove himself worthy crumbling in minutes. Judge Hamilton adjusted his glasses, reviewing more documents. I see here that Mr. Carter has completed several PTSD treatment programs and maintains regular therapy appointments. But is that enough? Marissa's lawyer asked rhetorically. Can we risk a child's safety on the hope that therapy is working? Daniel closed his eyes, fighting back tears. He thought of all the moments with Ellie, teaching her to fish in the creek behind his apartment complex, making pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, reading bedtime stories until she fell asleep. Would all that be taken away because of his struggles? The judge began to speak, his tone grave. Given the severity of these allegations, Your Honor, the small voice cut through the tension like a bell. Everyone turned to see Ellie standing, her little face set with determination. Young lady, please sit down, Judge Hamilton said, though his voice was gentler than before. No, please. Ellie's voice grew stronger. You're all wrong about my daddy. He didn't kidnap me. She took a deep breath, her next words ringing through the stunned courtroom. I kidnapped myself. Gasps filled the air. Marissa half rose from the witness stand, her carefully constructed mask slipping. Daniel stared at his daughter, his heart swelling with love and fear for her bravery. The courtroom erupted in chaos, whispers turning to exclamations. Judge Hamilton's gavel crashed down repeatedly, calling for order, but all eyes were on the small girl in the blue flower dress, standing tall despite her mother's attempts to pull her back into her seat. Judge Hamilton's gavel cracked through the stunned silence, but even that sharp sound couldn't break the spell that Ellie's words had cast over the courtroom. The little girl stood straight in her blue dress, her small hands gripping the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the court proper. Young lady, Judge Hamilton said, leaning forward in his chair. His stern expression softened as he addressed her. Please approach the bench and explain what you mean. Ellie walked forward with determined steps, her white shoes clicking against the floor. She glanced back once at her mother, whose face had gone pale, then at Daniel, who sat frozen in his chair, his eyes wide with concern and confusion. Sir, Ellie began, her voice clear despite its softness. Nobody took me anywhere. I went by myself. She twisted the hem of her dress with nervous fingers but kept her chin up. I just wanted to see my daddy. The judge folded his hands on his desk. Tell me exactly what happened, Ellie. It was last Saturday morning. Mama was sleeping late, like she always does on weekends. Ellie's words came faster now, as if she'd been holding them in for too long. I packed my backpack with my favorite teddy bear and some cookies. Then I got my bike from the garage. Real quiet. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Daniel's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. His court-appointed lawyer placed a steadying hand on his arm. I knew where Daddy lived because Mama once pointed at his trailer when we drove past, Ellie continued. It's not that far, just past the grocery store and down by Miller's Creek. Judge Hamilton's eyebrows rose. You rode your bicycle all that way by yourself? Yes, sir, Ellie nodded. I was careful about cars, just like they taught us in school, and I stayed on the sidewalk most of the way. Daniel's chest tightened as he imagined his little girl pedaling alone through town, determination driving each push of the pedals. The thought of what could have happened to her made his heart race. When I got there, Ellie said, Daddy was so surprised. He was making pancakes. She smiled at the memory. They were a little burnt, but I didn't mind. A few quiet chuckles emerged from the gallery, quickly hushed by the bailiff's stern look. And what did your father do when you arrived? The judge asked, his eyes shifting briefly to Daniel. He called Mama right away, Ellie said firmly. But she didn't answer her phone. He left lots of messages. She twisted her dress harder. I begged him to let me stay just a little while. I hadn't seen him in so long, and he makes the best pancakes, even when they're burnt. Daniel remembered that morning vividly, opening his door to find Ellie standing there with her purple backpack and hopeful smile. His first instinct had been panic, followed by joy he couldn't quite suppress, then worry about what this would mean. "Your Honor," Daniel spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. "I tried calling her mother repeatedly. When I couldn't reach her, I called the police to report where Ellie was. But they said since I'm her father, it wasn't technically a missing persons case." Judge Hamilton nodded slowly, making notes on the pad before him. "Mrs. Carter," he addressed Ellie's mother, who sat rigid in her chair. "When did you discover your daughter was missing?" "Around noon," she said through clenched teeth. "I called the police immediately." "Who told them I kidnapped her?" Daniel added quietly. The judge held up his hand for silence as more whispers broke out in the gallery. He turned his attention back to Ellie. "Why didn't you tell your mother you wanted to visit your father?" Ellie's lower lip trembled slightly. "She gets mad when I talk about him. Says he's no good." She looked at Daniel, her eyes bright with tears. "But that's not true. He's good to me. He reads me stories and lets me help cook and tells me about when he was a soldier protecting people." Daniel blinked rapidly, fighting back his own tears. Every word from his daughter's mouth was a gift he'd never expected to receive in this courtroom. Judge Hamilton sat back in his chair, studying the scene before him. After a long moment, he cleared his throat. "Given these new circumstances, I'm ordering a temporary halt to these proceedings." He looked at both parents. "This case clearly requires further investigation. We need to examine the custody arrangement and ensure the best interests of the child are being served." Relief flooded Daniel's face. Across the aisle, Ellie's mother's attorney was already whispering urgently in her ear. "Until then," the judge continued, "the current custody arrangement will remain in place, but I'm ordering supervised visitation for Mr. Carter and his daughter twice a week." He focused his gaze on Ellie. "No more bicycle adventures, young lady. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Ellie replied, a small smile playing at her lips. She looked at Daniel, her eyes shining with triumph and love. In that moment, she truly believed she had fixed everything, that her truth had been enough to make the grown-ups understand. Judge Hamilton's gavel fell once more. "Court is adjourned. We'll reconvene once the custody investigation is complete." As people began to rise and move about the courtroom, Ellie stood in the center, her smile bright and relieved, fixed on her father. Daniel wanted nothing more than to sweep her into his arms, but he remained in his seat, knowing the eyes of the court were still upon them. The bailiff stepped forward to escort Ellie back to her mother. But the girl's smile never wavered. She had done what she set out to do. She had protected her father, had made sure everyone knew the truth. In her 8-year-old heart, that was all that mattered. The courthouse hallway felt different now. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm squares on the worn marble floor where Daniel Carter stood. His too-big suit jacket hung heavy on his shoulders, but his heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. People filed past, their whispers and footsteps echoing off the walls. But Daniel only had eyes for Ellie. She bounced on her toes near the water fountain, her blue dress swishing around her knees. Her hair ribbons had come loose during the long morning in court, but her smile was brighter than ever. Daniel glanced around, making sure the bailiff who was supposed to supervise their interaction was nearby, then knelt down to Ellie's level. His bad knee protested, an old reminder from his military days, but he ignored it. Some moments were worth a little pain. "Come here, sweet pea," he said softly, opening his arms. Ellie didn't hesitate. She ran the few steps between them and threw herself into his embrace. Daniel hugged her close, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and fabric softener. "You were so brave in there," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for telling the truth." Ellie pulled back just enough to look at his face. Her small fingers played with one of his shirt buttons. "I had to, Daddy. They were being mean to you." Daniel's chest tightened at the word Daddy. It had been so long since he'd heard it from her lips. Sometimes grown-ups get things wrong, he said carefully. "But you helped make it right." But something shifted in Ellie's expression. The joy dimmed in her eyes, replaced by a shadow of worry that no 8-year-old should have to carry. She glanced down at her shoes, the patent leather ones she wore for special occasions, and bit her lower lip. "What's wrong, baby?" Daniel asked, his heart starting to race. He recognized that look. It was the same one she got when she was afraid to tell him about a bad grade or a broken toy. Ellie leaned in close, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Mommy says you're not really my daddy." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. The hallway seemed to tilt sideways, and the sunlight suddenly felt cold on his skin. His hands, still holding Ellie's small shoulders, began to tremble. "What?" The word came out as barely more than a breath. Tears welled up in Ellie's big brown eyes. "But I don't care," she said quickly, throwing her arms around his neck. "I don't care what Mommy says. You're my daddy. You make me pancakes and tell me stories and—" "Ellie?" Marissa's sharp voice cut through the moment like a knife. Daniel looked up to see Marissa striding toward them, her heels clicking against the marble floor like angry exclamation points. Her face was tight with fury, and her designer purse swung wildly from her arm. Ellie's arms tightened around Daniel's neck. He could feel her small body trembling. "Get away from her," Marissa snapped, reaching for Ellie's arm. "You have no right to be alone with her." "The bailiff is right there," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady for Ellie's sake. "We're not doing anything wrong." Marissa's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Oh, you've done plenty wrong, and now everyone's going to know exactly what kind of man you really are." She grabbed Ellie's arm and pulled. "Daddy!" Ellie cried, her fingers clutching at Daniel's shirt. "Let go, Ellie," Marissa ordered. "Now." Daniel's heart shattered as he gently loosened Ellie's grip. "It's okay, sweet pea," he whispered, though nothing felt okay. "I'll see you soon." "You'll lose her for good," Marissa hissed, yanking Ellie away. "I'll make sure of it." Daniel remained kneeling on the hard marble floor, watching helplessly as Marissa dragged Ellie toward the courthouse exit. Ellie looked back over her shoulder, tears streaming down her face, until they disappeared around the corner. The sunny squares on the floor suddenly felt like spotlights, exposing every doubt and fear he'd ever had about being Ellie's father. The whispers in the hallway grew louder. Or maybe that was just the sound of his world crumbling around him. Daniel's key scraped against the rusty lock of his trailer door. The metal groaned as he pushed it open, stepping into darkness, broken only by the dim glow of his neighbor's porch light, filtering through thin curtains. He didn't bother turning on the lights right away. The darkness matched his mood. The trailer's familiar musty smell wrapped around him as he shrugged off his borrowed suit jacket. He'd gotten it from the Veterans Center's donation box, and though it was too big, he'd been grateful to have something presentable for court. Now, it just felt like another reminder of how far he'd fallen. The broken refrigerator hummed loudly in the kitchen, an endless, uneven drone that usually faded into background noise. Tonight, it seemed to mock him, underlining the emptiness of his home. Daniel finally flicked on the lights, revealing the worn linoleum floors and water-stained ceiling he tried so hard to ignore. His fingers found the light switch by muscle memory, illuminating his small kitchen. The cabinets hung slightly crooked, their white paint peeling at the corners. A stack of unpaid bills sat on the counter next to a Bible worn soft at the edges from daily reading. Daniel's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. Opening a cabinet, he pulled out a can of beans, the last one from the food bank's monthly box. The pop of the can opener echoed in the quiet space. He didn't bother heating them up, just grabbed a fork from the drawer and leaned against the counter. "Not really, my daddy." Ellie's whispered words from the courthouse hallway haunted him. Each bite of cold beans turned to ash in his mouth. He'd loved that little girl since the first time he'd held her, tiny and perfect in the hospital 8 years ago. How could a piece of paper or a DNA test change that? The fork clattered against the empty can as memories ambushed him without warning. Not of Ellie this time, but of Iraq. The sound of helicopter rotors. The weight of his battle buddy Johnson in his arms, bleeding out in the sand. The endless nights of watching and waiting, never knowing if each breath might be his last. "Watch my six, Carter," Johnson had said that last day. But Daniel hadn't been able to save him, just like he might not be able to save his relationship with Ellie. The can slipped from his trembling hands, rolling across the counter. Daniel gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles white as he fought to steady his breathing. The PTSD episodes came less frequently now, but they still ambushed him when his defenses were down. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough. "I don't understand. Haven't I tried to do right? Haven't I worked hard? Stayed clean? Gone to church?" His legs felt heavy as he made his way to the small living room. The ancient TV sat dark and silent, a few of Ellie's drawings taped to its side. Daniel lowered himself to his knees beside the threadbare couch, clasping his hands together. "I know I ain't perfect," he continued, his prayer barely above a whisper. "Made plenty of mistakes, but Ellie, she's the best thing in my life, the one pure thing. Why does everything have to be so hard? Why does it feel like the whole world's against us?" Tears burned behind his closed eyelids. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Maybe not since Johnson died. But tonight, in the privacy of his empty trailer, Daniel Carter let the tears fall. He prayed until his knees ached, until the words ran dry and all he could do was sit in silence with his pain. Eventually, exhaustion won out. He climbed onto the couch, not bothering to change out of his dress shirt and slacks. Sleep began to pull at him, heavy and dark. A sharp knock at the door jolted him awake. Daniel sat up, heart pounding. The clock on the wall read 9:45 p.m. Another knock, gentler this time, followed by a familiar voice. "Daniel, it's Mrs. Green from next door. I saw your light on." He scrubbed a hand across his face, erasing any trace of tears, and went to open the door. Mrs. Green stood on his small porch, her silver hair, neat despite the late hour, holding a covered casserole dish. The smell of chicken and vegetables wafted from it, making his stomach growl again despite the beans. "I made too much dinner," she said, though they both knew that was her standard excuse for checking on him. "Thought you might like some real food after your day in court. The whole neighborhood's been praying for you and little Ellie." Her kind eyes took in his rumpled clothes and tired face, but she didn't comment. Instead, she just held out the casserole, steam still rising from under the foil cover. "Mrs. Green, you didn't have to—" "Hush now," she interrupted, pressing the warm dish into his hands. "The Lord tells us to bear one another's burdens. Sometimes that means casseroles." A ghost of a smile tugged at Daniel's lips. Mrs. Green had been bringing him casseroles since he'd first moved into the trailer park 3 years ago, fresh out of the VA hospital and struggling to put his life back together. She never asked for the dishes back, which was good because he usually ended up giving them to other veterans who had even less than he did. "Thank you," he said softly, meaning it for more than just the food. Mrs. Green patted his arm. "You're a good father, Daniel Carter. Don't let anyone tell you different. Blood don't make a family. Love does, and anybody with eyes can see how much you love that child." Her words hit him like a physical force, easing some of the tightness in his chest. He stood there, holding the warm casserole, unable to find the right words to express his gratitude. The morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Daniel shifted in the hard wooden bench, his borrowed suit still feeling like a costume. The halls were quieter today. No crowds, no accusations flying. Just the steady tick of the wall clock and the occasional shuffle of papers from the clerk's desk. Mrs. Green's words from last night echoed in his mind. She'd brought over not just a steaming casserole, but also a reminder that he wasn't alone. "The Lord doesn't give us more than we can handle," she'd said, patting his hand. "And he sure didn't make you Ellie's daddy just to take her away." The courtroom doors opened, and a slim woman in her 40s entered, carrying a leather briefcase. Her gray suit and practical shoes spoke of someone who meant business. Daniel recognized her type from his military days. Efficient, no nonsense. Someone who followed procedures to the letter. "Mr. Carter?" She extended her hand. "I'm Sarah Matthews, the guardian ad litem appointed to your case." Daniel stood, careful to maintain eye contact as they shook hands. "Yes, ma'am, thank you for being here. Please, sit." She settled beside him on the bench, pulling out a notepad. "I'll be observing your interactions with Ellie over the next few weeks. My job is to ensure her well-being and make recommendations to the court." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "My place. It ain't much, ma'am, but it's clean. And Ellie's got her own room." Sarah's pen paused on the paper. "Mr. Carter, I'm not here to judge you based on your income. I'm here to evaluate the relationship between you and your daughter." The words, "your daughter," hit him like a physical blow, remembering Ellie's whispered revelation. But before he could dwell on it, Sarah continued. "I'll need to do a home visit this afternoon. Is that possible?" Daniel's heart raced. His trailer was far from ready for inspection. The dishes from last night's beans were still in the sink, and he hadn't had time to fix the crooked cabinet doors or patch the water stains on the ceiling. "Yes, ma'am," he heard himself say. "What time? 3 o'clock?" That gave him just over 4 hours. Daniel straightened his shoulders. "I'll be ready." The drive home felt longer than usual, his mind racing with everything that needed to be done. As soon as he pulled up to his trailer, he headed straight for Mrs. Green's neat little mobile home next door. She answered his knock with a knowing smile. "Need some cleaning supplies, sugar?" Daniel ducked his head, embarrassed but grateful. "Yes, ma'am. Got someone coming to check on the place for Ellie." "Well, you just wait right here." She disappeared inside, returning moments later with a bucket full of supplies: pine cleaner, scrub brushes, paper towels, and even a can of paint. "For those water stains," she explained. "Quick coat'll cover them right up." Armed with Mrs. Green's supplies and a prayer in his heart, Daniel attacked his trailer like it was a military operation. He scrubbed every surface in the kitchen until the counters gleamed. The dishes were washed, dried, and put away in the freshly wiped cabinets. He tightened the loose hinges with a screwdriver borrowed from Mrs. Green's late husband's toolbox. In Ellie's room, he carefully straightened her small collection of second-hand books and the stuffed bear he'd gotten her from the dollar store. The bed was made with military precision, her favorite blanket, pink with white polka dots, smoothed free of wrinkles. On the wall, he'd hung every drawing she'd ever given him, creating a gallery of crayon masterpieces. The bathroom took the most effort. He scrubbed the tub until his arms ached, polished the mirror, and arranged the fresh towels Mrs. Green had insisted on lending him. The worn linoleum floor hadn't looked this clean since he'd moved in. By 2:30, Daniel stood in his living room, surveying his work. The trailer wasn't fancy, but it was clean. More than clean. It felt like a home. He'd even managed to slap a quick coat of paint over the worst water stains, though the smell lingered in the air. Mrs. Green appeared at his door with a vase of fresh daisies from her garden. "For the coffee table," she said, shuffling past him. "Brings a little life to the room." Daniel's throat tightened. "Mrs. Green, I don't know how to thank you," she waved him off. "You just focus on getting your baby girl back. That'll be thanks enough." At precisely 3 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. Sarah Matthews stood on his small porch, notebook in hand. Daniel invited her in, trying not to hover as she moved through each room, making notes and asking questions. "Ellie's room is well prepared," she commented, studying the wall of drawings. "She loves to draw," Daniel said softly. "Brings me a new picture every time I see her." Sarah nodded, writing something down. In the kitchen, she noted the well-stocked cabinet of kid-friendly foods, boxes of mac and cheese and fruit cups that Mrs. Green had quietly added to his supplies. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Sarah closed her notebook. "Mr. Carter, I'll be straight with you. Your home is modest but well-maintained. I can see you've made real efforts to create a safe, nurturing environment for Ellie." Daniel held his breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I'm going to recommend supervised visitation, starting tomorrow, 2 hours, here at your home, with me present." The words took a moment to sink in. When they did, Daniel's legs nearly gave out. He managed to thank her, to walk her to the door, to maintain his composure until she drove away. Then, alone in his freshly cleaned living room, with Mrs. Green's daisies catching the late afternoon sun, Daniel Carter dropped to his knees. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." Tomorrow, his little girl would come home, if only for 2 hours. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was hope. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunlight and the sweet scent of early summer. Daniel had been up since dawn, scrubbing every surface of his small trailer until it gleamed. He'd borrowed cleaning supplies from Mrs. Green and even managed to fix the wobbly leg on his kitchen table. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the pancake ingredients on the counter: flour, eggs, milk, and the special chocolate chips he'd saved up to buy. At exactly 9 o'clock, a silver sedan pulled up outside. Daniel's heart leaped when he saw Ellie's pigtails bouncing as she jumped out of the car. The social worker, Miss Pectils Matthews, followed close behind, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "Daddy!" Ellie's voice rang out clear and bright as she ran toward him. Daniel knelt down, and she crashed into his arms with the force of pure joy. He held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I missed you so much." Miss Matthews stood back, watching with careful eyes as they made their way inside. Ellie's face lit up when she saw the pancake ingredients. "Are we making chocolate chip pancakes?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Sure are." Daniel pulled out a kitchen chair for her. "Want to help me mix the batter?" Ellie climbed up eagerly, her small hands gripping the wooden spoon as Daniel measured out the flour. Together they stirred the ingredients, flour dusting their clothes and laughter filling the tiny kitchen. When some batter splashed on Ellie's nose, she giggled, and the sound was sweeter than any music Daniel had ever heard. "Remember how we used to make these every Saturday?" Ellie asked, watching intently as Daniel poured the batter onto the hot griddle. "I sure do, baby girl." He flipped a pancake with practiced ease. "You always wanted extra chocolate chips." "Still do," she grinned, showing the gap where her front tooth was missing. Miss Matthews sat at the kitchen table, taking notes, but her presence faded into the background as father and daughter fell into their familiar rhythm. They ate their pancakes with syrup and butter, Ellie chattering about school and her friend Sarah's new puppy. After breakfast, they settled in the small living room for a game of checkers. Daniel pulled out the old board he'd kept all these years, the one with Ellie's name written in crayon on the back. "Tell me about being a soldier, Daddy," Ellie said as she jumped one of his pieces. "Were you scared?" Daniel paused, carefully choosing his words. "Sometimes, yes. But I had good friends watching my back, and we looked out for each other." "Like my friends at school look out for me?" Ellie moved another piece, just like that. Daniel smiled, watching her concentrate on the game. "Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared. Is that why you're being brave now?" Ellie looked up at him with those knowing eyes that seemed too wise for her 8 years. Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm trying to be, sweetheart." They played 3 games of checkers, Ellie winning 2. Her victory dance made even Miss Matthews crack a smile. Afterward, Daniel showed Ellie the small garden he'd started behind the trailer. Just a few tomato plants and some herbs, but Ellie treated it like a magical kingdom. "Can we plant flowers next time?" she asked, touching a tomato leaf gently. "Any kind you want," Daniel promised, his heart aching at the words, "next time." The morning passed too quickly. They looked at old photos, and Daniel told her stories about his childhood in Georgia, about fishing with his own father, and learning to ride a bike. Ellie soaked up every word, asking questions and leaning against his side on the worn couch. When Miss Matthews finally stood and announced it was time to go, Ellie's face fell. She wrapped her arms around Daniel's waist, pressing her face into his shirt. "You're still my daddy," she whispered fiercely. "Don't let them take me away." Daniel blinked hard, feeling tears gather in his eyes as he held his daughter close. He couldn't speak, could only hold her tighter, his heart too full of love and fear and hope to form words. Miss Matthews waited by the door, her expression unreadable, as she watched father and daughter embrace. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the tears that glistened in Daniel's eyes, turning them to gold. The Sunday morning service had just ended, and Daniel Carter stood in the church parking lot, watching Ellie skip ahead in her yellow polka-dot dress. Her patent leather shoes clicked against the pavement as she turned back to him with a bright smile. "Can we get ice cream now, Daddy? You promised?" Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Sure can, sweetheart." Daniel adjusted his tie, the only one he owned, and took her small hand in his. The summer heat was already building, making his second-hand suit jacket uncomfortable, but he kept it on. Appearances mattered in this small town, especially for him. As they walked the 3 blocks to Miller's ice cream parlor, Daniel noticed the sidewalks weren't as empty as they usually were after service. Church folks seemed to be lingering, their eyes following him and Ellie. He heard the whispers start, trying to shield Ellie from them, but they carried on the humid air. "Did you hear about the trial? Can't believe they're letting him have visits. Dangerous, if you ask me. PTSD. And all. Not even her real father." Daniel held Ellie's hand a little tighter, guiding her attention to the shop's colorful awning ahead. "What flavor are you thinking about today, Princess?" "Chocolate chip," Ellie declared, bouncing on her toes, "with rainbow sprinkles." The bell above the door chimed as they entered Miller's. The cool air inside was a relief, but the atmosphere changed as soon as they stepped in. Conversations hushed. A mother pulled her child closer. Mr. Miller, behind the counter, barely met Daniel's eyes. "1 chocolate chip with rainbow sprinkles," Daniel said clearly, his voice steady despite the tension. "And 1 vanilla, please." While Mr. Miller scooped their ice cream, Daniel felt the weight of stares on his back. Ellie, bless her heart, seemed oblivious to it all, pressing her face against the glass display case and pointing out all the flavors she wanted to try. Next time. They found a small table by the window. Daniel helped Ellie with her napkin, watching as she dove into her ice cream with pure joy. A drop of chocolate ran down her chin, and he gently wiped it away with a paper napkin. "Daddy," Ellie said between bites, "why do people look at us funny?" Daniel's heart clenched. He hadn't realized she'd noticed after all. Before he could answer, the bell chimed again, and Pastor Thomas walked in, his kind face breaking into a warm smile when he saw them. "Well, if it isn't my favorite ice cream enthusiasts," Pastor Thomas said, pulling up a chair. He nodded to Daniel. "Mind if I join you?" "Please do, Pastor," Daniel replied, grateful for the friendly face. Pastor Thomas ordered a scoop of butter pecan, then settled in with them. He engaged Ellie in conversation about Sunday school, giving Daniel a moment to breathe. The whispers around them continued, but somehow they seemed less potent with Pastor Thomas there. When Ellie excused herself to the restroom, Pastor Thomas leaned in. "How are you holding up, Daniel?" Daniel stared into his melting vanilla ice cream. "It's hard, Pastor. The looks, the whispers, I know what they're saying about me." "Small towns can be cruel with their judgments," Pastor Thomas acknowledged. "But remember what we discussed in Bible study. God's truth is bigger than small-town lies. Your love for Ellie is real, and that's what matters. But what if they're right?" Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if I'm not good enough, not fit enough?" Pastor Thomas's weathered hand reached across the table, resting on Daniel's arm. "The Lord doesn't make mistakes, son. He put you in Ellie's life for a reason. Your love for her, that's as real as it gets." Ellie returned, her face lighting up when she saw some ice cream still left in her bowl. The conversation shifted back to lighter topics, but Pastor Thomas's words had settled deep in Daniel's heart. After they finished, Daniel and Ellie said goodbye to Pastor Thomas and headed back to Daniel's trailer for her afternoon nap. The summer heat had intensified, and Ellie was growing sleepy from the walk and the ice cream. Daniel carried her the last block, her head heavy on his shoulder. Inside the trailer, Daniel helped Ellie change into her favorite pajamas, the ones with little stars all over them. He read her a story about a brave little bird finding its way home, then tucked her into the small bed he'd set up in the spare room. "Daddy?" Ellie's voice was drowsy as she gripped his hand. "I love you. I love you too, Princess." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. More than anything, through the thin walls of the trailer, he could hear the neighbors outside, their voices carrying clearly. Living in that broken-down trailer, can't even provide proper, should be with her real family. But Daniel looked at Ellie's peaceful face, her small hand still holding his, and felt his faith strengthen. Pastor Thomas was right. God's truth was bigger than their lies. The love between him and Ellie was real, no matter what anyone said. He sat there, watching his daughter drift off to sleep, letting her gentle breathing drown out the gossip beyond the walls. In that moment, Daniel found his own kind of peace, anchored by faith and the simple truth of a father's love. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Veterans Center as Daniel's old pickup truck rattled to a stop. Ellie pressed her face against the passenger window, eyes wide at the sight of the American flag snapping in the breeze above the modest brick building. "This is where you come sometimes?" she asked, unbuckling her seatbelt. Daniel nodded, his hand still gripping the steering wheel. "Sure is. Lots of good people here who understand what it's like to serve." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. He'd been coming to the center for support groups, but bringing Ellie felt different, vulnerable somehow. As they walked toward the entrance, Ellie slipped her small hand into his. The automatic doors swooshed open, releasing a blast of cool air. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs of service members and American flags. A bulletin board overflowed with support group schedules and resource pamphlets. "Well, look who it is." A booming voice echoed through the lobby. Sergeant Mike Wheeler, a barrel-chested man with silver hair, rolled his wheelchair toward them. "And who's this little lady?" Ellie half hid behind Daniel's leg, but her curiosity won out. "I'm Ellie," she said. "This is my daddy's special place." Mike's face lit up. "Your daddy? You mean Lieutenant Carter here?" He winked at Daniel. "Did you know your dad saved my life in Iraq?" Ellie's eyes grew round as saucers. She tugged on Daniel's hand. "Really, Daddy?" Daniel's cheeks warmed. "Mike likes to tell stories," he said softly. "Stories nothing." Another veteran approached, James Cooper, walking with a cane. "Your old man's a hero, little miss. When our convoy got hit, he ran through gunfire to pull 3 of us out of a burning truck, got that Purple Heart right there on the wall to prove it." Ellie followed James's pointing finger to a display case. There, among other medals and citations, was a photograph of a younger Daniel receiving his Purple Heart. She pressed her hands against the glass, studying the image. "That's my daddy," she whispered, pride making her voice tremble. More veterans gathered around, each with their own story about Daniel. How he'd kept their spirits up during long desert nights with his terrible jokes. How he'd shared his last water bottle during a sandstorm. How he'd written letters home for a soldier who'd lost his right hand. Daniel stood quietly, uncomfortable with the attention, but touched by how his brothers-in-arms were showing Ellie a side of him she'd never seen. She soaked up every word, her chest puffing up with pride. "Can I draw something?" she asked suddenly. "For the wall?" Mike wheeled over to the activity room. "We've got plenty of paper and crayons in here, sweetheart." Ellie settled at a table, tongue poking out in concentration as she worked. Daniel sat beside her, watching her small hands move across the paper. She'd inherited his artistic touch, something that surprised him every time she drew. 20 minutes later, she held up her masterpiece. She'd drawn Daniel in his uniform, standing tall with a cape flowing behind him. Above the figure, in wobbly letters, she'd written, "Daddy the Hero." "It's beautiful, baby girl," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Can we put it on your fridge?" Ellie asked. "So you can see it every day?" "You bet we can." The other veterans admired the drawing, praising Ellie's talent. She beamed under their attention, occasionally glancing at Daniel as if to make sure he was seeing how proud everyone was of him. As the afternoon wound down, they said their goodbyes. Mike squeezed Daniel's shoulder. "Bring her back any time, Lieutenant. She's good medicine for all of us old soldiers." Outside, the day had cooled into evening. Stars were just beginning to peek through the darkening sky as Daniel and Ellie walked hand in hand toward his truck. Ellie clutched her drawing in her free hand, protecting it from the gentle breeze. "Daddy?" she said softly. "Yes, baby? I knew you were brave, but I didn't know you were that brave." Daniel squeezed her hand, his heart full. He looked up at the emerging stars, whispering a prayer of thanks for this moment, for his daughter's love, for the chance to be seen through her eyes as the man he'd always hoped to be. The prayer was simple, just a few words of gratitude carried up to heaven on the evening breeze, but it contained all the joy and hope his heart could hold. Ellie's drawing crinkled softly in the wind, a testament to the power of a child's love to heal old wounds and make heroes out of broken men. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Daniel's small trailer, its metal siding reflecting the harsh Georgia heat. He stood at his kitchen sink, humming as he washed the few dishes from lunch. Through the window, he could see Ellie in the tiny backyard, carefully watering the tomato plants they'd started together during her last visit. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the peaceful moment. Daniel's shoulders tensed as he recognized Marissa's silver sedan pulling up outside. He dried his hands on a worn dish towel and stepped onto the narrow front porch just as she slammed her car door. "Ellie!" Marissa's voice cracked like a whip. "Get in the car, now!" Daniel's heart clenched as he watched Ellie freeze, the plastic watering can dropping from her hands. "The visit's not supposed to end for another hour," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. Marissa marched toward him, her heels digging into the gravel. Her face was flushed with rage, mascara slightly smeared at the corners of her eyes. "I've had enough of this little game you're playing," she spat. "What kind of lies have you been filling her head with?" "I haven't told her anything but the truth," Daniel replied, fighting to maintain his composure. "That I love her and I'm here for her." "Love?" Marissa laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You think you can just waltz in here and play daddy after all these years? You've got her so confused she's making up stories in court." Ellie had crept closer, hovering uncertainly near the corner of the trailer. Her lower lip trembled as she watched her parents face off. "The only one confusing her is you," Daniel said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Telling her I'm not her father. Because you're not." Marissa's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "Look at her and look at you. You really think that precious little white girl is yours? You've been deluding yourself all these years, and now you're brainwashing her too." The racial slur that followed hit Daniel like a physical blow. He took a step forward, 8 years of military discipline warring with the urge to defend himself. But then he caught sight of Ellie's face, pale and frightened, and the anger drained away, replaced by a deep sadness. "I won't do this in front of her," he said quietly. "She deserves better than to see adults fighting like this." "Oh, now you're concerned about what's best for her?" Marissa sneered. "Where was that concern when you were deployed? When you came back broken? When you couldn't even hold down a job?" Each accusation landed like a knife, but Daniel stood his ground. He thought of Pastor Thomas's words about turning the other cheek, about showing God's love even to those who hurt you. "My past mistakes don't change how much I love that little girl," he said firmly. "Love isn't enough," Marissa shot back. "You think the court's going to let you keep playing house with her once the truth comes out? I've already scheduled the DNA test. This whole charade ends next week." "Mommy, please." Ellie's small voice cut through the tension. "Don't be mean to Daddy." Marissa whirled toward her daughter. "He is not your daddy. How many times do I have to tell you that? Get in the car right now." Daniel's heart broke as he watched Ellie's shoulders slump. She looked up at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "It's okay, baby girl," he managed to say past the lump in his throat. "Everything's going to be okay." Marissa grabbed Ellie's arm, pulling her toward the car. "We'll see about that," she said over her shoulder. "Once the test results come back, you'll never see her again. And that's a promise." Daniel watched helplessly as Marissa buckled Ellie into the back seat. His daughter pressed her hand against the window, and he raised his own in response, maintaining that connection until the car disappeared down the dusty road. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel sank onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. The weight of Marissa's threats pressed down on him, along with the familiar burden of prejudice he'd carried his whole life. But beneath it all, Ellie's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't be mean to Daddy." She still believed in him. And for her sake, he had to stay strong, had to keep choosing love over anger, faith over fear. Whatever the DNA test might show, he knew in his heart that being a father was about more than biology. It was about the love that bloomed in small moments, watering tomato plants, cooking pancakes, wiping away tears. Standing slowly, Daniel walked to the fallen watering can. He picked it up and finished tending to the tomato plants. Each careful pour an act of hope, a promise to keep nurturing the precious things that had been entrusted to him, no matter what storms might come. The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Daniel Carter sat on the hard bench outside Courtroom B, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. His worn suit jacket, borrowed from Pastor Thomas, felt heavy on his shoulders in the stuffy hallway. Beside him, 8-year-old Ellie swung her legs back and forth, her patent leather shoes barely scraping the floor. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny daisies that Daniel had bought her during their last shopping trip. Her dark curls were neatly braided, tied with matching yellow ribbons. "Daddy?" Ellie's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Why do they need to check if you're my daddy? I already know you are." Daniel's heart clenched at her innocent question. He turned to face her, managing a gentle smile despite the worry gnawing at his insides. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups need special proof for important things." The courthouse door creaked open, and a court clerk emerged. "The Carter case? Judge Hamilton will see you now." Daniel stood, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. Ellie slipped her tiny hand into his larger one, squeezing it reassuringly. Together, they walked into the courtroom, their footsteps echoing in the hushed space. Judge Hamilton sat at his bench, his expression stern but not unkind. To the left, Marissa, Ellie's mother, sat with her attorney, her lips pressed into a thin line. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Good morning," Judge Hamilton's voice carried across the room. "We're here today for the DNA testing ordered in the Carter custody case." He gestured to a woman in a white coat standing near his bench. "Miss Peterson from the medical lab will conduct the test." Daniel guided Ellie to the front of the courtroom, where 2 chairs had been placed. The medical technician smiled warmly at them both, especially at Ellie. "Hello there," she said, kneeling to Ellie's eye level. "This is going to be very quick and easy, just like cleaning your teeth with a Q-tip." Ellie nodded bravely, though Daniel felt her grip tighten on his hand. The technician opened her kit, pulling out several sealed swabs. "Ladies first?" Miss Peterson asked, holding up the first swab. "It's okay, baby girl," Daniel whispered, as Ellie looked up at him uncertainly. "I'm right here." Ellie opened her mouth, and Miss Peterson gently swabbed the inside of her cheek. The little girl giggled. "It tickles." Her laughter broke some of the tension in the room, though Marissa remained stone-faced in her seat. Daniel caught Judge Hamilton hiding a small smile behind his hand. "Your turn, Mr. Carter," Miss Peterson said, opening a new swab. As she approached him, Daniel closed his eyes briefly, sending up a silent prayer. "Lord, please give me strength. Whatever happens, help me be the father Ellie needs." The swab brushed against his cheek, and then it was done. Miss Peterson carefully labeled both samples and sealed them in separate envelopes. "Wasn't so bad, was it, Daddy?" Ellie whispered, swinging their joined hands. "I wasn't scared at all 'cause you were here." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. He squeezed her hand gently, unable to speak for a moment. Judge Hamilton cleared his throat. "The lab results will be available in 1 week's time. We'll reconvene next Wednesday at 9 a.m. sharp." He looked directly at Daniel and Marissa. "Until then, the current visitation schedule remains in place." The sharp crack of the gavel made Ellie jump slightly. As people began to rise and move about the courtroom, Daniel knelt down to Ellie's level. "How about we walk home through the park?" he suggested, straightening her yellow hair ribbon. "Maybe we can spot some real daisies to match your dress." Ellie's face lit up. "Can we feed the ducks too?" "Of course we can, sweetheart." Daniel stood, nodding respectfully to Judge Hamilton before leading Ellie toward the door. "We're going to make this whole week special, okay? Every single day." "Promise?" Ellie asked, skipping alongside him as they descended the courthouse steps into the warm Georgia morning. "I promise," Daniel replied, his voice firm despite the uncertainty churning in his stomach. The sunshine warmed his face as they walked, and he focused on the sound of Ellie's cheerful chatter about ducks and daisies, trying to push away thoughts of what next Wednesday might bring. They passed the old magnolia tree on the courthouse lawn, its white blooms filling the air with sweetness. Ellie reached up and caught a falling petal, pressing it carefully into her pocket. "For luck," she said. Daniel watched her, memorizing every detail of this moment, the way the sunlight caught her hair, how her yellow dress swished as she walked, the trust in her eyes when she looked up at him. The morning after the DNA test, Daniel woke before sunrise. He had a plan. 7 precious days to fill with memories, just in case. His trailer's tiny kitchen came alive with the smell of pancakes and the soft sound of gospel music from his old radio. When Ellie arrived with the social worker at 8, her face lit up at the sight of breakfast. "Blueberry pancakes!" She bounced on her toes, her braids swinging. "Are those real blueberries?" "Sure are, sweetheart." Daniel flipped another golden circle onto her plate. "Mrs. Green from next door has a whole bush of them." After breakfast, Daniel surprised Ellie with his old fishing poles, cleaned up and ready for action. The social worker, Miss Thompson, followed them to Lake Wilson in her car. The morning air was crisp, and dew still sparkled on the grass as they set up their spot on the weathered dock. "Now, watch careful, like," Daniel demonstrated, helping Ellie bait her hook. Her small hands were steady as she copied his movements. "That's it, just like that." They spent hours there, Ellie squealing with delight when she caught her first bluegill. "Daddy, look, I did it!" Her pride made his heart swell. The next day, Daniel packed them a simple picnic. Peanut butter sandwiches, apples, and cookies from the church bake sale. They spread their blanket in Memorial Park, under an old oak tree. Ellie named shapes in the clouds, while Daniel taught her the hand-clapping games his grandmother had shown him as a child. Miss Mary Mac, Mac, Mac. All dressed in black, 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 they chanted together, their hands moving in perfect rhythm. Ellie's laughter echoed across the park, drawing smiles from passers-by. Wednesday brought rain, but Daniel was prepared. He transformed his small living room into a fort, using sheets and chairs. Inside their cozy shelter, he read from his worn Bible, sharing stories of David and Goliath, of Daniel in the lion's den. "Were you scared like Daniel was?" Ellie asked, her eyes wide. "When you were a soldier?" Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, I was scared sometimes. But like Daniel, I knew God was with me. And now, He's with both of us." They sang hymns together, Ellie's sweet voice joining his deeper one in "Amazing Grace" and "This Little Light of Mine." She added her own dance moves, twirling in circles until she collapsed, giggling, onto their pile of cushions. Thursday, they baked cookies in his tiny kitchen. Flour dusted their clothes and noses as they shaped the dough into hearts and stars. The cheap oven burned them slightly, but Ellie declared them the most delicious cookies ever. While they cooled, Daniel taught her to draw. His hands, rough from years of work, guided hers gently as they sketched simple pictures: houses, trees, flowers. Ellie's determination showed in her furrowed brow as she concentrated on getting each detail just right. Friday came too quickly. Daniel's heart felt heavy knowing it was their last day before the results. He took her to the Veterans Center again, where his old friend Mike showed her photos of Daniel's unit. "Your daddy," Mike told her, "was the bravest man I knew, carried me half a mile when I was hurt." Ellie beamed with pride, clutching her drawing supplies. Back at the trailer, she worked quietly for an hour, tongue poking out in concentration. Finally, she held up her masterpiece, a crayon drawing of Daniel in his uniform, standing tall and strong. "See, Daddy? That's you being brave." She pointed to the medals she'd drawn on his chest, some real, some imagined. "And look, I'm standing right next to you." As evening settled in, they sat on his worn couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching old cartoons. Daniel noticed Ellie's eyes growing heavy, her head nodding. She clutched her drawing to her chest, fighting sleep. "Time for prayers, baby girl," he whispered. "Can we pray extra tonight?" she murmured, already half asleep. "For the test results? Of course we can." Daniel's voice caught in his throat as he began their usual bedtime prayer. "Dear Lord, thank you for this precious week." Before he could finish, Ellie's breathing had deepened into sleep. She looked so peaceful, her small fingers still holding tight to her artwork. The colored wax had smudged slightly where she held it, but the love in every crayon stroke was clear. Daniel sat there watching her sleep, memorizing every detail of her face, the slight curl of her eyelashes, the peaceful set of her mouth, the way her hair fell across her forehead. His whispered prayer continued, barely audible in the quiet room. Please let her stay mine. The clock ticked softly on the wall, marking the minutes until tomorrow's truth would change everything. Or nothing. But for now, in this moment, Daniel held on to the peace of watching his daughter dream, her drawing of their family held close to her heart. The courthouse's wooden benches creaked under shifting bodies as people filed in that Monday morning. Daniel Carter tugged at his collar, the same worn suit feeling even heavier today. The air conditioning hummed weakly against the Georgia heat, but it did nothing to ease the cold sweat on his brow. Ellie sat in the front row, her small fingers clutching the drawing she'd made at the Veterans Center. Daddy the Hero, written in crayon, had become wrinkled from her constant holding. She caught Daniel's eye and gave him a brave smile, though her leg bounced nervously against the bench. Judge Harrison entered, his robes swishing as he took his seat. The bailiff carried a sealed envelope to the bench. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as the judge carefully opened it. "Before I read these results," Judge Harrison said, his voice echoing in the hushed courtroom, "I want to remind everyone to maintain proper decorum." His eyes swept over the gallery, lingering on Marissa, who sat with her arms crossed, a hint of triumph already playing at her lips. Daniel closed his eyes and prayed. Not for himself, but for Ellie. Sweet Ellie, who'd drawn him as a hero, who'd made him pancakes with too much syrup, who'd fallen asleep listening to his stories about the good parts of his military service. His little girl. The judge cleared his throat. In the matter of paternity regarding minor child Eleanor Marie Carter. He paused, adjusting his reading glasses. The DNA analysis shows a 0% probability of paternity. Mr. Daniel Carter is not the biological father of Eleanor Carter. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. His legs went weak, and he gripped the table to stay upright. Behind him, whispers erupted like angry hornets. "I knew it," Marissa's voice cut through the murmurs. "I told everyone he was lying." But Daniel barely heard her. His eyes sought Ellie, who stood frozen in the gallery. The drawing slipped from her fingers, floating to the floor like a fallen leaf. Her face crumpled, tears welling in her big brown eyes. "Ellie," Daniel called softly, reaching toward her. "Baby, please," but Ellie shook her head violently, her braids whipping side to side. "You lied!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "Everyone lies!" She turned and ran, her small shoes slapping against the polished floor as she burst through the heavy courthouse doors. "Ellie!" Daniel called again, starting after her. But Marissa's lawyer jumped up, blocking his path. "Your Honor, given these results, we move for immediate termination of all visitation rights." "Please," Daniel begged the judge, his voice raw. "Just let me talk to her. She needs to understand." "Mr. Carter." Judge Harrison's stern voice cut through the chaos. "You will remain in this courtroom until we sort out the legal implications of these findings." Daniel watched helplessly as Marissa hurried after Ellie, shooting him a victorious glare as she passed. The courtroom buzzed with conversation, but to Daniel, it all sounded far away, like he was underwater. His lawyer touched his arm. "Daniel, we need to discuss our options." But Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He stumbled backward, away from the table, away from the pitying looks and judgmental stares. Nobody tried to stop him as he pushed through the side door into the empty hallway. The corridor stretched long and cold, its marble floors reflecting the fluorescent lights above. Daniel's legs gave out, and he slid down the wall until he sat on the floor, his head in his hands. "Then who am I without her?" he whispered into the empty hall, his words echoing back to him like a cruel reminder of everything he'd lost. The drawing Ellie had made lay abandoned in the courtroom, Daddy the Hero, face down on the floor, just like all his hopes for their future together. Through the thick wooden doors he could hear the muffled sounds of the court proceeding without him. His lawyer's voice rose in protest. Marissa's in triumph, the judge calling for order. But none of it mattered anymore. The truth he'd feared most had become reality. The past week's memories flashed through his mind, teaching Ellie to fish, her squeals of delight when she caught her first bluegill, reading her bedtime stories until she fell asleep against his shoulder, her small hand in his as they walked through the park, pointing out different birds and making up silly names for them. All of it felt like ashes now, slipping through his fingers like the sand in the hourglass they'd watched together on her last visit. He'd known, deep down, that this might be the outcome, but he'd allowed himself to hope. Hope that love could be stronger than blood. Hope that prayers could change science. Hope that somehow God would let him keep the one pure thing in his life. The hall's air conditioning clicked on, its mechanical hum mixing with Daniel's ragged breathing. He pulled his knees to his chest, making himself small, just like he used to do during mortar attacks in Iraq. But this pain was worse than any physical wound he'd received in combat. This struck straight to his soul. "Lord," he prayed, his voice barely a whisper, "I know you gave her to me for a reason, even if it was just for this short time. But please," his voice cracked, "please, don't let this be the end." The sound of running feet made him look up, hoping against hope it was Ellie returning. But the hallway remained empty. The morning sun filtered through Daniel Carter's trailer windows, casting long shadows across his sparse living room. 5 days had passed since the DNA results shattered his world. Ellie's drawing still hung on his refrigerator, held by a chipped magnet, a crayon masterpiece showing him in his military uniform, the words, "Daddy the Hero," written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. Daniel sat at his small kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee untouched before him. The silence in the trailer was deafening. No giggles, no stories about school, no requests for pancakes. Just emptiness. The social worker had called yesterday. "Ellie doesn't want to come for her visit," she'd said gently. "She needs time to process." Daniel understood the words, but they cut deep all the same. He pushed himself up from the table and walked to the fridge, his fingers tracing the edges of Ellie's drawing. The paper had already started to curl at the corners, like his hopes of keeping her in his life. His chest ached with a pain worse than any physical wound he'd received in combat. The phone rang twice that morning, once from his lawyer, once from the court. Daniel let both calls go to voicemail. What was there to say? The test results spoke clearly enough. He had no biological claim to Ellie. The truth he'd feared most was now cold, scientific fact. Around noon, someone knocked at his door. Daniel didn't move to answer it. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Daniel Carter, I know you're in there." Mrs. Green's voice carried through the thin door. "And I've got a casserole that's getting cold." Despite himself, Daniel's lips twitched slightly. The elderly widow's persistence was legendary in their little community. He crossed the room and opened the door. Mrs. Green stood there, her silver hair neatly pinned back, holding a covered dish. Her kind eyes took in his rumpled appearance, the same t-shirt he'd worn yesterday, the dark circles under his eyes. "Land's sake, child," she said, pushing past him into the trailer. "When's the last time you ate something proper?" Daniel shrugged, watching as she set the casserole on his counter and began opening cabinets like she owned the place. "Not hungry," he mumbled. "Nonsense," Mrs. Green replied, pulling out plates. "Sit down. The Lord didn't give us bodies to starve them." Too tired to argue, Daniel sank into a kitchen chair. Mrs. Green served him a generous portion of chicken and rice casserole, then sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Now then," she said firmly, "tell me why you're letting that precious child slip away without a fight." Daniel stared at his plate. "You heard the results, Mrs. Green. I'm not her father." "Hogwash," she declared, making him look up in surprise. "A daddy's not just in the blood, it's in the love." "But the law—" "The law?" Mrs. Green interrupted. "The law once said I couldn't drink from the same water fountain as white folks." Sometimes the law needs helping seeing what's right. She reached across the table and patted his hand. "That little girl chose you, Daniel. She ran away from her mama's house to find you. She stood up in court to defend you. That means something." Daniel's voice cracked. "She won't even see me now. She thinks I lied to her." "Then you show her you're still there," Mrs. Green said firmly. You show her that love doesn't pack up and leave when things get hard." She pointed to the drawing on his fridge. "That's how she sees you, as her hero. Heroes don't quit, do they?" Daniel looked at the drawing again, remembering Ellie's face as she'd presented it to him. The pure joy in her eyes, the way she'd hugged him tight and declared him the best daddy in the world. His throat tightened. "I just want what's best for her," he whispered. "And you think what's best is letting her believe another person who loves her has abandoned her." Mrs. Green's voice was gentle but firm. "That child has known too much hurt already. She needs to see that real love stays." The truth of Mrs. Green's words settled deep in Daniel's chest. He thought of his own childhood, of growing up without a father. He'd promised himself he'd never let a child of his feel that same emptiness. And even if Ellie wasn't his by blood, she was his in every way that mattered. Mrs. Green stood, gathering her purse. "Eat that casserole," she instructed. "Then clean yourself up. You've got fighting to do." She paused at the door. "And Daniel? Don't forget to pray. The Lord's got a plan in all this mess, even if we can't see it yet." After she left, Daniel sat in the quiet trailer for a long while. Finally, he pushed back from the table and went to his bedroom. Kneeling beside his bed, he closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't understand your plan here. I don't know why you let me love this little girl so much if I wasn't meant to be her daddy. But I need your strength now. Help me fight for her. Help me show her that love, real love, is stronger than blood." The evening light slanted through his window as he prayed, casting a warm glow across Ellie's drawing. Outside, a whippoorwill began its evening song, a reminder that life went on, even in the midst of heartache. Daniel remained on his knees, pouring out his fear and pain to God, asking for guidance, for wisdom, for the strength to keep going when everything in him wanted to give up. He prayed for Ellie's heart to be protected, for her to understand that his love for her had never been a lie. The wooden floor was hard against his knees, but Daniel didn't move. The morning sun cast long shadows through Daniel Carter's trailer as he sat at his small kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper before him. His worn Bible lay open beside it, its pages marked with years of prayers and promises. The final custody hearing was tomorrow, and the weight of what might be his last chance to reach Ellie pressed heavy on his shoulders. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. The cheap plastic felt foreign in his fingers, more used to manual labor than writing letters. But these words needed to come out, even if they weren't perfect. "My dearest Ellie," he began, then paused, watching a tear splash onto the paper. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and started again on a fresh sheet. "My dearest Ellie, there are so many things I want to tell you, baby girl. First, I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Every moment we've shared has been real. Every pancake breakfast, every bedtime story, every prayer we said together. Those weren't lies, they were love. I know you're angry and confused right now. You have every right to be. When we found out I wasn't your biological father, it hurt both of us deep down. But Ellie, being a daddy isn't just about blood, it's about love. It's about choosing to be there every single day, through the hard times and the good times. Remember when you skinned your knee at the park last month? You didn't care who my parents were when I cleaned that cut and kissed it better. Remember when we went fishing and you caught your first bass? The joy in your eyes wasn't because of DNA, it was because we were together, sharing that moment. I may not be your father by blood, but my heart chose you the moment you came into my life. Nothing, not test results, not court decisions, not anything in this world, can change how much I love you. You're the bravest person I know, Ellie. You stood up in that courtroom and told the truth when everyone else was ready to believe the worst about me. You showed me what real courage looks like. Now I'm trying to be brave like you. If the judge decides we can't be together anymore, I want you to remember something important. You will always be my daughter in my heart. Always. I'll keep your drawing on my fridge. I'll keep praying for you every night. And I'll keep loving you, no matter what. God has a plan bigger than what we can see right now. Sometimes it's hard to understand why things happen the way they do. But I trust that He knows what He's doing, even when it hurts. You taught me how to be a better man, Ellie. You taught me that love is stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, stronger than anything that tries to tear us apart. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for letting me be your daddy, even if it was just for a little while. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Love always. Daddy. Daniel read the letter over, his vision blurring with tears. The words seemed inadequate to express the depth of his love for Ellie, but they were all he had. He folded the paper carefully, his calloused fingers smoothing each crease with deliberate care. Opening his Bible, he turned to Psalm 27, the passage he'd read to Ellie so many times when she was afraid of the dark. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The familiar words brought a measure of peace to his troubled heart. He slipped the letter between the pages, right where the psalm began. Maybe someday, if things went wrong tomorrow, someone would make sure Ellie got it. Maybe she'd read it and understand that his love had always been real. The afternoon light faded into evening, and Daniel moved through his usual routines like a man in a dream. He heated up the last of Mrs. Green's casserole, but barely tasted it. He laid out his best suit, the one he'd worn to court that first day, and polished his only dress shoes until they shone. As night fell, he knelt beside his bed, just as he did every evening. But tonight, his prayers were different. Instead of asking God to let him keep Ellie, he asked for strength to accept whatever came next, and for Ellie's heart to be protected through it all. Sleep was elusive, but eventually, exhaustion won out. As Daniel drifted off, his mind filled with memories of Ellie's laughter, her small hand in his, her voice calling him Daddy, with such certainty. In his dreams, they were back at the fishing pond, Ellie's face lit with joy as she reeled in her first catch. "Did you see that, Daddy?" "Dream," Ellie called out, her eyes shining with pride. "Did you see what I did?" "I see you, baby girl," he answered in the dream, his heart full. "I'll always see you." The words echoed in his mind as he slept, a bittersweet lullaby carrying him through his last night, before the hearing that would determine their future. The hallways of Riverside Elementary buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. Colorful artwork lined the walls, and the scent of cafeteria pizza wafted through the air. Ellie Carter sat quietly at her desk in Mrs. Peterson's third-grade classroom, trying to focus on her math worksheet. But the whispers behind her were getting louder. "I heard she doesn't even know who her real daddy is," Jenny Miller said, not bothering to keep her voice down. "My mom says that man was just pretending," Tommy Richards added. Ellie's pencil pressed harder against the paper, making dark marks that she'd have to erase later. She tried to remember what Daniel had taught her about staying calm when people were unkind. "Just breathe deep and remember who you are," he'd said. But the memories of him made her chest hurt now. "Hey, Carter," Jenny called out. "At least I know who my daddy is." The classroom spun around Ellie. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Without asking permission, she pushed back her chair and ran from the room, ignoring Mrs. Peterson's startled "Ellie." The girls' bathroom became her refuge. She locked herself in the last stall, pulled her knees up to her chest, and finally let the tears come. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as her small shoulders shook with sobs. "He lied," she whispered to herself. "Everyone lies." But even as the words left her mouth, other memories flooded in. Daniel's hands, gentle and patient, showing her how to flip pancakes without making a mess. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Really smiled. Not the fake smile grown-ups sometimes gave kids. She remembered their first morning together, how scared she'd been that he wouldn't want her there. Instead, he'd wrapped her in a warm hug that smelled like coffee and Old Spice, just like she'd always imagined a daddy would smell. "Let's make breakfast," he'd said, pulling out mixing bowls and flour. Every daddy should know how to make pancakes for his little girl. The memory was so clear, watching him measure ingredients, letting her stir even though she splashed a little. He hadn't gotten mad when she spilled milk on the counter. He'd just grabbed a cloth and helped her clean it up, turning it into a game of who could wipe faster. More memories came rushing back. Sitting by the lake with fishing poles, Daniel teaching her how to bait a hook. She'd been squeamish about the worms at first, but his patience never wavered. "Take your time, princess," he'd said. No rush. Then there were the bedtime prayers. Every night before she left, they'd kneel together by his worn couch. His voice would get soft and warm as he thanked God for their time together. He always ended the same way. And Lord, thank you for bringing this precious girl into my life. Ellie wiped her eyes with toilet paper. The bathroom didn't seem so scary now. She could hear other girls coming and going, but she stayed quiet in her stall, thinking. Daniel had never actually lied to her, she realized. He'd never promised he was her biological father. He'd just loved her, simply, completely, without conditions. Even when she'd been scared at the Veterans Center, surrounded by strangers, he'd held her hand and introduced her proudly. This is my daughter, Ellie. Standing up, Ellie smoothed her wrinkled dress. The one Daniel had said made her look like a princess. She unlocked the stall door and walked to the sink, having to stretch a little to see herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red from crying. But something else was there, too. The same determination she'd felt that day in court when she'd first stood up to tell the truth. Daniel had taught her about courage, about standing up for what was right even when it was hard. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, he'd told her one night after she'd had a nightmare. It means you do what's right anyway. Ellie stood straighter, looking at her reflection. She saw Daniel's strength in her own face. Not in her features, maybe, but in the set of her jaw, the lift of her chin. He'd shown her how to be strong, how to speak truth, even when her voice shook. The bathroom door creaked open, and Jenny Miller walked in, stopping short when she saw Ellie. But Ellie didn't run this time. She remembered how Daniel stayed calm, even when people in town whispered about him, how he held his head high and kept walking. Jenny opened her mouth, probably ready with another mean comment, but Ellie spoke first. My daddy taught me that family isn't about blood, she said clearly. It's about love. Jenny blinked, surprised by Ellie's steady voice. Turning back to the mirror, Ellie looked at herself again. She saw more than just her reflection now. She saw every moment Daniel had loved her, every pancake breakfast, every bedtime prayer, every proud smile. Taking a deep breath, she whispered to her reflection, but loud enough for Jenny to hear, I kidnapped myself, and I'll say it again. The words felt right in her mouth, true in her heart. They tasted like pancakes and fishing days and bedtime prayers. They felt like Daniel's hugs and his gentle hands showing her how to cast a fishing line. They sounded like his voice saying, I love you, princess, even when he knew the truth might take her away. Jenny stood frozen by the sink, but Ellie didn't care anymore what Jenny or anyone else thought. She understood now what Daniel had been teaching her all along, that love doesn't need permission from DNA tests or court orders. Love just is. Squaring her shoulders, Ellie smoothed her dress one more time. In the mirror, she saw Daniel's courage reflected in her own eyes. The truth that had been growing in her heart all morning solidified into certainty. She would stand up again, just like before. She would tell everyone what really mattered. Her whispered words echoed slightly against the bathroom tiles. I kidnapped myself, and I'll say it again. The courthouse's ancient air conditioning system fought a losing battle against the Georgia heat. Late morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. Daniel Carter sat rigid at the defendant's table, his borrowed tie feeling like a noose around his neck. The DNA results lay on the judge's desk like a death sentence for his dreams of fatherhood. Marissa Green stood at the podium, her designer suit a stark contrast to Daniel's threadbare one. Her voice dripped with satisfaction as she addressed Judge Hamilton. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mr. Carter has no biological claim to my daughter. His continued presence in Ellie's life only serves to confuse and upset her. Daniel's hands trembled beneath the table. He could feel the weight of every stare in the gallery, hear the whispers that followed him everywhere now. The past week's silence from Ellie had carved a hole in his heart deeper than any wound from his time in service. Judge Hamilton's weathered face showed no emotion as he reviewed the papers before him. His reading glasses caught the sunlight as he looked up at Marissa. Mrs. Green, you're requesting full custody with no visitation rights for Mr. Carter, correct? Yes, Your Honor. Marissa's smile was sharp as a razor. It's time for this charade to end. My daughter needs stability, not false hopes from a man he reads me stories, even when he's tired. The small voice cut through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Every head turned toward its source. Ellie Carter stood in the gallery, her blue dress wrinkled from sitting, her butterfly hair clip catching the sunlight. Her small hands were balled into fists at her sides. "Young lady," Judge Hamilton began, his stern tone softening slightly at the sight of her determined face, "please sit down. This is a formal proceeding." But Ellie took a step forward instead, her Mary Janes clicking against the hardwood floor. "He checks under my bed for monsters," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "He makes pancakes in funny shapes and tells me I'm smart and brave, even when I mess up." "Ellie!" Marissa hissed, her face flushing red. "Sit down this instant." Daniel sat frozen, his heart pounding as Ellie walked past her mother, past the bailiff who seemed unsure whether to stop her, right up to the judge's bench. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. "Your Honor," she said, using her most grown-up voice, though it quivered slightly. "I don't care what the paper says. He's my daddy because he loves me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Hamilton leaned forward, his usual stern expression softening further. "Ellie, I understand you care for Mr. Carter, but there are laws." "I kidnapped myself to be with him," Ellie interrupted, tears starting to roll down her cheeks, even as her chin lifted higher. "And I'd do it again, because he's the only one who prays with me at bedtime and teaches me about being brave and good. He's the only one who makes me feel safe, like a daddy should." The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Even the old air conditioning unit seemed to hold its breath. Daniel felt tears streaming down his own face as he watched his daughter, yes, his daughter, stand her ground before the law itself. "The test says he's not my blood daddy," Ellie continued, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But my heart says he is. And isn't that what matters? Isn't love what makes a family real?" Daniel couldn't stay seated anymore. His legs moved of their own accord, carrying him forward until he knelt beside Ellie. His large hand engulfed her small one as she gripped it tight, like a lifeline in a storm. "Your Honor," Daniel's voice was rough with emotion, "I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm poor and broken in some ways. But I love this little girl with everything I am. She's my daughter in every way that matters." Judge Hamilton removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The morning sun cast shadows across his face as he looked down at the father and daughter before him. In his eyes, something shifted, the strict letter of the law meeting the undeniable truth of love. Marissa started to protest, but the judge held up his hand, silencing her. His gaze remained fixed on Ellie and Daniel, on their clasped hands, on the matching tears on their cheeks. The whole courtroom seemed to lean forward, waiting. "I've served on this bench for 27 years, Judge Hamilton said slowly. "I've seen hundreds of custody cases, but I've never—" He paused, clearing his throat. "I've never seen such pure truth spoken in my courtroom." Ellie's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. More tears fell, but neither of them moved to wipe them away. They stood together, waiting, hoping, praying. The judge picked up his gavel but didn't bring it down. Instead, he held it thoughtfully, looking at father and daughter with eyes that had seen too many families torn apart by legal technicalities. "The law," he said carefully, "is meant to serve justice. But sometimes justice must serve love." Judge Hamilton removed his reading glasses and laid them carefully on the bench before him. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the soft whir of the ceiling fans overhead. He studied Ellie's determined face, then looked at Daniel, who sat with quiet dignity despite the tears gleaming in his eyes. "In my 30 years on this bench," the judge began, his deep voice resonating through the hushed room, "I've seen countless custody battles. Most focus on biological ties, financial stability, and material provisions." He paused, his weathered hands folded deliberately on the desk. "But today, an 8-year-old girl has reminded this court of what truly matters in raising a child." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as he reached for Ellie's small hand. She squeezed back, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. The law typically favors biological parents, Judge Hamilton continued. However, the law also recognizes that a child's best interest must prevail above all else. He sat straighter, his voice taking on an official tone. Having reviewed all evidence, including the remarkable bond between Mr. Carter and Ellie, I hereby grant shared custody to both parties. The gallery erupted in gasps and murmurs. Mrs. Green, sitting in the back row, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Pastor Thomas nodded solemnly, a smile breaking across his face. Mr. Carter will have Ellie 3 days per week and alternating weekends, the judge specified. Miss Green will maintain primary custody, but both parents must collaborate on major decisions regarding Ellie's upbringing. Marissa shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous! He's not even her father!" Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she gathered her belongings. "Miss Green," Judge Hamilton's voice carried a note of warning. "This court's decision is final. I suggest you accept it gracefully, for your daughter's sake." But Marissa was already storming toward the exit, her designer purse swinging wildly. The heavy wooden doors slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the courtroom. Daniel barely noticed her departure. He had fallen to his knees, gathering Ellie in his arms as tears flowed freely down his cheeks. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you." Ellie wrapped her arms around his neck, her small body trembling with emotion. "I told you, Daddy," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I told you they couldn't take me away." The courtroom, which had so often witnessed bitter endings, now filled with the warmth of spontaneous celebration. Even the court reporter was wiping away tears. The guardian ad litem approached, her professional demeanor softening as she watched father and daughter embrace. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand. "Your dedication to Ellie has been remarkable throughout this process." Several community members who had once whispered about Daniel now approached with sheepish smiles and congratulations. Mrs. Jenkins from the grocery store, who had previously clutched her purse tighter when he passed, now patted his shoulder warmly. Mr. Peterson, the hardware store owner who had denied him credit last month, offered a firm handshake. "You're a good man, Daniel," Pastor Thomas said, making his way through the crowd. "The Lord sees true love, even when others are blind to it." Daniel stood slowly, keeping one arm around Ellie. "Thank you, Pastor. Thank you all." His voice was thick with emotion. "All I ever wanted was to be her father." Judge Hamilton descended from the bench, something he rarely did after proceedings. He approached Daniel and Ellie, his stern courthouse demeanor replaced by a grandfatherly smile. "Young lady," he addressed Ellie directly, "your courage today taught us all something important about family." He turned to Daniel. "Mr. Carter, take good care of this remarkable daughter of yours." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, standing straighter. "Every day of my life." The crowd began to disperse, filing out of the courtroom into the bright Georgia afternoon. Daniel gathered his worn Bible and the few papers his court-appointed lawyer had brought. Ellie skipped beside him, her patent leather shoes tapping a happy rhythm on the marble floors. As they stepped outside, the humid air wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The courthouse steps, which had seemed so intimidating weeks ago, now felt like a pathway to a new beginning. Sunlight glinted off the building's white columns, and birds sang in the oak trees lining the street. Daniel looked down at Ellie, her face glowing with joy. Without warning, he scooped her up and lifted her onto his shoulders. Her surprised squeal turned into delighted laughter, the first real laugh he'd heard from her in weeks. Her small hands gripped his head for balance as she sat tall above the world. "Higher, Daddy," she giggled, and the sound of her happiness echoed off the courthouse walls, replacing all the bitter words that had been spoken there. The remaining onlookers couldn't help but smile at the sight of them. The man in his borrowed dress shirt and the little girl in her blue dress, silhouetted against the Georgia sky, their laughter a testament to love that transcended blood and prejudice. 3 weeks after the court decision, Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. His old suit, the one he'd worn throughout the trial, had been carefully cleaned and pressed. Mrs. Green had helped him iron out the wrinkles the night before, showing him how to get the collar just right. "Lord," he whispered, smoothing down the fabric one last time. Help me make her proud today. The morning sun filtered through his trailer's small window, catching the silver starting to show at his temples. He'd trimmed his beard neat and close, and polished his old dress shoes until they gleamed. The wear on their soles didn't matter. What mattered was being there for Ellie's big day. In the kitchen, a bright yellow flyer hung on his refrigerator. Madison Elementary School presents Family Day. Ellie had circled the date 3 times in red crayon, adding little hearts around the edges. She'd been practicing her speech all week, though she wouldn't tell him exactly what she planned to say. Daniel grabbed his keys and the small bouquet of daisies he'd picked up from the grocery store. They weren't fancy, but they were Ellie's favorite. The drive to Madison Elementary felt both too long and too short, his heart beating faster with each mile. The school parking lot was packed with minivans and SUVs. Daniel carefully parked his old pickup truck between 2 shiny vehicles, saying a quick prayer that the rusty door wouldn't scratch anything when he opened it. As he walked toward the building, he noticed other fathers in expensive suits, mothers in designer dresses. For a moment, his confidence wavered. But then, he remembered Ellie's words from their practice dinner the night before. "You look like a king in your suit, Daddy." The memory straightened his spine and lifted his chin. Inside the school gymnasium, fold-out chairs filled the floor in neat rows. Construction paper decorations and student artwork covered the walls, transforming the space into a rainbow of color. A makeshift stage had been set up at the front, complete with a red curtain borrowed from the drama department. Daniel found his seat in the 3rd row, exactly where Ellie had insisted he sit. "So I can see your face, Daddy." Other parents filed in around him, some giving curious glances, others offering polite smiles. He recognized a few faces from church, including Pastor Thomas, who had come to support them. Mrs. Green slipped into the seat beside him, patting his hand. "You clean up nice," she whispered with a wink. Daniel smiled gratefully at his faithful friend. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, stepped up to the microphone. "Welcome, families, to our annual Family Day celebration. Our 3rd grade class has prepared special presentations about what family means to them." The red curtain opened to reveal 28 nervous 3rd graders lined up in their best clothes. Daniel's heart swelled when he spotted Ellie in her favorite yellow dress, the one they'd picked out together at the thrift store. She'd insisted on wearing her hair in 2 neat braids, just like in the photo of her grandmother he'd shown her. One by one, students stepped forward to introduce their families. Some had elaborate posters covered in photos. Others had prepared poems or songs. Daniel watched Ellie fidgeting in line, practicing her words silently to herself. When it was finally her turn, she took 3 steps forward and squared her small shoulders. The gymnasium fell quiet as Ellie Carter, the girl whose courtroom confession had become local legend, faced her audience. Her eyes found Daniel's immediately, and her smile bloomed like sunshine. "My name is Ellie Carter," she began, her voice clear and strong, "and I want to introduce you to my daddy." She pointed directly at Daniel, who sat up straighter, fighting back tears already. "This is my daddy. He didn't kidnap me." She paused, her smile growing mischievous. "I kidnapped him, right into my heart." A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the crowd, followed by knowing smiles. The story of their court battle had touched many in their small town, changing hearts and minds about what really makes a family. "Some people think daddies have to match their kids," Ellie continued, her voice getting softer but no less certain. "But my daddy taught me that love is what makes a real family. He makes me pancakes shaped like hearts, and teaches me Bible verses, and never gets mad when I ask too many questions." Daniel couldn't hold back his tears now. They rolled freely down his cheeks as his daughter spoke from her heart. "When I was scared during the big storm last week, he let me sleep in his room and told me stories about brave soldiers until I wasn't afraid anymore. And even when mean people said he wasn't my real daddy, he just loved me more." Mrs. Green squeezed Daniel's hand as more sniffles could be heard throughout the gymnasium. Even Mrs. Rodriguez was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "So this is my daddy," Ellie declared proudly. "He's a hero who fought for our country, and he's the best daddy in the whole wide world. Because he chose me, and I chose him, and love is bigger than anything else." The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous wave. parents stood, clapping and wiping away tears. Pastor Thomas's "Amen" could be heard above the noise. Daniel remained seated, overwhelmed by emotion, until Mrs. Green gently pulled him to his feet. Ellie bounded down the stage steps and ran straight into his arms. Daniel lifted her up, holding her close as the applause continued around them. The daisies got slightly crushed between them, but neither minded. "Did I do good, Daddy?" she whispered in his ear. "Baby girl, you did amazing," he managed through his tears. "I'm so proud of you." The rest of the presentations continued, but Daniel barely noticed. He held Ellie in his lap, her small hand wrapped firmly in his larger one. They sat together, father and daughter, bound by something stronger than DNA, bound by choice, by faith, and by a love that had survived every test. As the red curtain began to lower for the final time, Ellie squeezed his hand and looked up at him with complete trust and adoration. Daniel smiled through his tears, knowing that this moment, this perfect, precious moment, was worth every struggle, every doubt, every prayer. The curtain fell, but their story was just beginning. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please, don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.